Imagine a fleet of ships, so vast it stretched for miles across the ocean, dwarfing anything that European explorers would sail for another century. At its helm was a man whose story is one of the most incredible in the history of exploration. Today, we're talking about Zheng He, China's admiral who sailed beyond the horizon and commanded the greatest armada the world had ever seen. So, who was this legendary figure? Zheng He wasn't born an admiral. In fact, his early life was marked by tragedy. Born around 1371 with the name Ma He, he was from a Muslim family in the province of Yunnan. When he was just a boy, the Ming army conquered his homeland. He was captured, castrated, and sent to serve in the imperial court as a eunuch. It's a brutal start, but it was in the court of the ambitious Prince Zheng He that his fortunes began to change. He proved himself to be a brilliant and loyal servant, excelling in both military and diplomatic matters. When Zheng He eventually seized the throne and became the Yongle Emperor, he rewarded his faithful follower. He was given a new name, Zheng He, and a monumental task that would etch his name into history forever. The Yongle Emperor had a grand vision. He wanted to project Ming China's power across the seas, establish diplomatic ties, and expand the tributary system. He wasn't interested in conquering new lands in the same way European powers later would be. Instead, he wanted the world to recognize China's glory and superiority. To do this, he needed a fleet unlike any other, and an admiral he could trust implicitly. And that admiral was Zheng He. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He led 7 epic expeditions into the Western Oceans, which is what the Chinese called the Indian Ocean. And when I say epic, I mean it. His first voyage alone consisted of over 300 ships and nearly 28,000 crew members. To put that in perspective, Columbus's first voyage to the Americas had 3 ships and 90 men. The difference is just staggering. At the heart of this massive fleet were the legendary treasure ships, or Baiyoshuan. Historical accounts describe these vessels as giants, possibly over 400 feet long and 160 feet wide. Think about that. That's longer than a modern football field. These were floating cities with 9 masts and decks that housed not only sailors and soldiers, but also diplomats, doctors, astronomers, and translators. They carried immense amounts of Chinese silk, porcelain, and tea to trade and to give as gifts to foreign rulers. On the return journey, they were filled with exotic treasures, from spices and rare woods to rhinos, giraffes, and zebras that would fascinate the imperial court back in Nanjing. The sheer scale of these fleets was a tool of diplomacy in itself. When Zheng He arrived at a foreign port, it was a display of overwhelming power and wealth. But it was mostly a soft power approach. His mission was to establish friendly relations and invite rulers to send envoys to China. He would present them with lavish gifts from the emperor and in return accept their local products as tribute. This wasn't a one-sided deal. These tributary states often received even more valuable gifts from the emperor, making it a very beneficial relationship for them. Of course, it wasn't always smooth sailing. The seas were full of pirates, and not every local ruler was welcoming. Zheng He was a skilled military commander, and his fleet was heavily armed. On his first voyage, he famously confronted and defeated a notorious pirate chief who controlled the Strait of Malacca, a critical choke point for maritime trade. This single act made the trade routes significantly safer and earned Zheng He a reputation as a formidable leader who could bring order to the oceans. In another instance in Sri Lanka, when a local king acted aggressively, Zheng He's forces swiftly intervened, captured the king, and took him back to China. The Yongle Emperor, however, chose to pardon him and send him back, showing that the goal was cooperation, not conquest. Zheng He's voyages took him to places that were, to the Chinese, the very edges of the known world. His fleets visited Southeast Asia, India, the Persian Gulf, and the Arabian Peninsula. They reached the Swahili coast of Africa, stopping at ports in modern-day Kenya and Tanzania. There's even a popular, though highly debated, theory that one of his fleets might have rounded the Cape of Good Hope and reached the Atlantic, or even the Americas, long before Columbus. While there's no concrete evidence for these more extreme claims, what we know for sure is already mind-blowing. The giraffe he brought back from Africa, for example, was believed by the Chinese court to be the mythical Kilin, a creature said to appear only during the reign of a wise and benevolent ruler, a huge PR win for the Yongle Emperor. These expeditions weren't just about trade and diplomacy. They were also missions of scientific discovery and cartography. Zheng He's teams meticulously mapped the coastlines, studied the currents and wind patterns, and documented the cultures, politics, and natural resources of the lands they visited. The resulting maps and records were incredibly detailed for their time and represented a huge leap in Chinese geographical knowledge. They were creating a comprehensive picture of the maritime world that connected China to Africa. So, if China was so far ahead in naval exploration, why didn't they colonize the world? Why did these epic voyages suddenly stop? It's one of history's great what-ifs. The answer lies in the shifting politics of the Ming court. The Yongle Emperor, the main sponsor of the voyages, died in 1424. His successors faced new problems, particularly renewed threats from the Mongols on their northern border. Defending the Great Wall was expensive and became the top priority. Within the imperial court, a powerful faction of Confucian scholar officials had always been skeptical of the expeditions. They saw them as extravagant, wasteful, and a distraction from the real issues at home. They argued that China was a self-sufficient agricultural society and had no need for foreign trinkets or costly overseas adventures. As this faction gained more influence, the political will to fund the treasure fleets evaporated. Zheng He embarked on his seventh and final voyage under the reign of the Xuandi Emperor, the Yongle Emperor's grandson. It was a last grand journey to re-establish the connections that had lapsed. Zheng He, now in his 60s, is believed to have died on the return trip in 1433 and was likely buried at sea, a fitting end for a man who had spent so much of his life on the water. After his death, the era of great Chinese maritime exploration came to an abrupt end. The giant treasure ships were left to rot in their harbors, and the official records of their voyages were deliberately suppressed or even destroyed by court officials who wanted to erase this chapter of history. China turned inward, adopting a policy of isolationism that would last for centuries. It's fascinating to think about how different the world might be if China had continued its voyages. What if Chinese ships, not Portuguese or Spanish, had been the first to dominate the global sea lanes? But history took a different path. For centuries, Zheng He's story was largely forgotten, both in China and the rest of the world. It was only in the 20th century that his legacy was rediscovered and celebrated. Today, Zheng He is remembered as a symbol of China's peaceful diplomatic and maritime heritage. He was an explorer, a diplomat, and a military commander who connected civilizations, not through conquest, but through trade and mutual respect. His voyages stand as a testament to an incredible period in history when China's reach extended across the oceans, led by a eunuch admiral who rose from captivity to command the greatest fleet the world had ever seen. His story reminds us that history is full of surprising turns and that there are always new horizons to explore. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most incredible figures. See you next time.